Hello, my name is Joshua Keith, and this is theburningcoal.com, a website dedicated to God's glory, His grace, and our response to it. Today we're going to do a Thanksgiving Thursday, and we're going to talk about being thankful for the Almighty. This is a term that typically we use in our hymns, but in it we're talking about God's power, how strong and mighty God is, that He has power above all things. And notice what the psalmist says in Psalm 95, verses 2 through 3. It says, "Let us come into His presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to Him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods." So we see here that the psalmist talks about that we can and we should have thanksgiving, that we should have joy because of the nature of the God that we serve. That God is greater than any other God, that He's greater than any other king. And so because of that, we can have joy. We can be encouraged. And I think that, sometimes we acknowledge that God is all powerful, but we may not really realize how deeply it impacts us in our day-to-day life. The first thing is that we need to understand that God is not co-equal with Satan. If you think about something like Star Wars, obviously a made up world, but it represents this religious view of the Force. And there's a light side and there's a dark side. And sometimes the light side wins, sometimes the dark side wins. And they take turns going back and forth, being in control. But there's never any guarantee that the light side or the good is going to win. It's just this eternal struggle back and forth with nobody ever truly winning. That is not the God that we serve. We do not serve a God that is going back and forth, but instead, we serve a God who is able to defeat all of His enemies. And this should be really encouraging for us because not only does He defeat His enemies, but because we are aligned with Him, He defeats our enemies. And this helps when we're struggling with a sense of powerlessness as we look around in our day and age. If you go out and look at the news right now, you're going to see all sorts of rich, powerful people that are theoretically getting in trouble for things, but not in the way that we would. If they're getting in trouble at all, sometimes you just see, well, it's kind of made a big deal that it's something that they're doing is wrong, but they're not really going to face any consequences. And the reason why is because they're too powerful. Nothing can overcome them, is how it feels to us. But what we need to understand is that we have a God who is more powerful than them. And really, I think that's the entire point of the book of Revelation, is that the people who persecute you, the government of the day, if they're not willing to submit to God's authority, then they are going to be defeated by God. And even if they're calling on Satan himself, if Satan comes against us, and we know he will, he's a roaring lion seeking who he may devour, we don't have to be worried. We don't have to be afraid. We do not have to feel powerless because God is on our side. And He is the king over all other kings. He is the king over all other rulers. He is the God over all other gods. Nothing and no one can stand before Him. And that's even more encouraging because it means that God is able to keep His promises. I'm sure we've all had a well-meaning friend who has made a promise and they really want to keep it. They really want to be helpful, but something happens. Car breaks down, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's even good excuses, but they can't keep the promise. Not because they didn't want to, not because they weren't trying to, but because they did not have the power to keep the word that they gave. That is never the case with our God. God keeps His promises. He has not made a promise that He cannot and will not keep. And so we can have great comfort knowing that our God is above God, because it doesn't matter what Satan tries to do. It doesn't matter what the rulers, what the rich people do. It doesn't matter what our enemies do, because God has promised us eternal life. God has promised us deliverance. And nobody can overcome God. Nobody can keep God from fulfilling those promises in our lives. And so we can take great comfort and joy in knowing that we follow a God who will overcome and do what he has said he will do. I hope this lesson blesses you in your walk in his